Good morning. Thank you so much. So I was a journalist. I'm now a futurist. What I basically do is look at, I have a team, we look at trends that are 2 to 15 years out, and we try to make sense of what that means for the present. And so a lot of companies hire us to figure out what the future of X is. Every year we put out a big, huge report. This year there were 55 trends. You can get this on SlideShare. We always make it available to the public. And the way that we figure out what those trends are, I'm going to very briefly tell you because it informs the rest of what I'm going to talk about today. It looks like this. So we start out on the fringes of society and people who are doing experiments in research and development. We make observations. We then look for hidden patterns, and we have a system that we use to figure out what those patterns are. We then interrogate potential trend candidates by asking a lot of questions to figure out what it is that we're seeing and what that means. We then look for an S-curve, and I'm going to talk a lot in the next 20 minutes about what an S-curve is and why you need to use it. But basically, we're looking for different points of inflection to figure out where the trend is and what that means. Then we come up with a way to take action on the trend. Oftentimes, a lot of companies acknowledge that something's happening, but then they don't, there's no follow through. So everybody right now acknowledges that there's a resurgence of broadcasting, live broadcasting using mobile, but nobody's taking action on that. And in reality, the action should have been taken a while ago. And finally, we pressure test that action to make sure that whatever the strategy is something that's sort of future-proofed. So I talked about an S-curve, and this is really important for all of you to sort of keep in the back of your mind. This is when we're forecasting trends, the idea is to try to capture that trend at just the right time. And down there at the bottom is where the fringe is, and that's really where you want to start paying attention. That blue arrow that I just put on the screen tends to be where news organizations who think that they're very forward-thinking and that they're pushing the 8 ball ahead. This is where they are. They're actually pretty far past where they should be. So the fringe is where you want to be. So what I'm going to talk to you about is attention. And attention is probably, it was not itself one of the trends in our 55 trend report this year, but it's pervasive. It's a part and parcel to everything that we're thinking about, or many of the things that we're thinking about. And attention is very much a leadership challenge within news organizations. And that's because oftentimes engagement, so what we're talking about today tends to be relegated to a separate team within a newsroom. You might have an audience engagement specialist or a team of people, but from my point of view, finding an engaging audience is really everybody's job, whether you want to call them audience or community or whatever it is. And the idea is that regardless of what trend we're following, it has to somehow activate or be activated by an audience, otherwise it sort of doesn't matter. So these are 5 questions that we ask anytime that we're looking at a trend or a digital strategy, and they all have to do with audience. So where or how are people wasting their time? Where or how are people having difficulty with technology? Where or how are people looking for information? Where or how are people getting stuck? And finally, how do people want to be perceived? Through our research, we've sort of discovered that answering these 5 questions, if you are able to answer those 5 questions within the realm of a digital strategy, or a trend that you may be looking at, if you have answers to those 5 questions, then whatever it is that you're working on will probably have some legs into the future. The thing that we see not happening is that news organizations especially do not ask and answer these questions. And here's the result of that. So if you look at Google Now, and if any of you have an Android phone, you've already got access to this. If you've got an Apple, if you've got an iPhone, you can download Now as an application. But Google Now is very much setting the stage for everything that's to come. If you were to ask me who's reinventing the future of news, it's not any newspaper or magazine or broadcaster or Fusion, any new. Although they're doing neat stuff, the future of news is being created by Google. And this is a really good example of how that's working. So this is Google Now. They present just the right amount of information at just the right time. This is no longer a fringe product. It's moving past the first movers, the first people who would adopt this, and is about to reach a tipping point and head into the mainstream. And they've just, a couple weeks ago, announced a partnership with 40 different collaborators that are all going to be a part of this platform. So anyhow, with that in mind, I'd like to make 3 recommendations that have to do with engagement and audience. And the first recommendation has to do with devices. So what I would tell all of you is to stop focusing on the devices and instead start focusing on your consumers. So if we think back to that S-curve, again, from my point of view, news organizations are just now starting to focus on mobile distribution. And I define mobile as phones and also tablets. So there's a great podcast produced by WNYC, which is a public radio station in New York, and it's called New Tech City. And they asked their listeners to voluntarily contribute their mobile data. So about 12,000 people uploaded their data, and they ran some numbers to see what people were doing with their phones. So it turns out most of that audience, which to be fair is limited and very specific, so it's not a great scientific study, but most of their audience is on their phone about 95 minutes a day, and they pick up their phones an average of 50 to 60 minutes per day. And that actually tracks with some of the data that we see nationally. It's higher, so once you factor in younger people and people who aren't just listening to that podcast, our average is about 151 to 169 mobile minutes per day. And if you start doing the math and thinking through how many times we pick up our phones, really what we're talking about is fewer than 2 minutes per pickup each time we pick up the phone. Basically what that means is that our attentions are either directly or ambiently connected to our mobile phones all day long. Even me, I'm talking to you right now and I'm sort of conscious of what my phone is doing. And I'm sure you're doing the same thing. So the question is, what can be done in fewer than 2 minutes if we know that on each pickup you have about less than 2 minutes per engagement? Well, in fewer than 2 minutes, you could check email, you might check social media, you might look at push notifications on your screen, check the weather or traffic, maybe play a quick game, maybe read a quick story. So if you start doing some math and you know that you have fewer than 2 minutes available to capture somebody, you actually, if you start breaking that down, it takes about 3 seconds once you pick up the phone for your brain to register what exactly it's looking at on the home screen, to start making some decisions. If you see a bunch of push notifications, you have to sort of think through, are you going to click on any of them? Maybe you take 4 seconds to decide. And that really is eating up about 30 seconds of your engagement time, which leaves about 90 seconds really to look through email or to do texting or whatever. What that means is that you don't have 2 minutes to engage your audience. You actually have less than 30 seconds because that's when all of that decision making is happening. But actually, you don't have 30 seconds because as it turns out, if you look at the neuroscience of how we make decisions, we're visual decision makers, and your readers and the people that engage with you, they're making visual decisions in less than 3 seconds. So suddenly, if we start thinking about mobile websites and mobile applications within the realm of news, if you have, a very, very short amount of time, if you have less than 3 seconds, and this is what you're giving your audience, it may not be surprising that engagement is not where you want it to be as a news organization. On the left-hand side with the globe, there's a lot of information on that screen, and I may not be attracted or I may be confused. Usually when you see some red at the top of the screen, it's a warning about something. And on the New York Times site, there are definitely stories there that would engage me, but that may not be true of everybody. And it totally depends on what's being published at that moment in time. So the question is, if we know that we have so little time, such a short window to engage people, then why do we move forward with this design? And the reason is because there's been no innovation in how we port the content that we've always produced into the digital realm. There really is no discernible, significant difference between what a newspaper looked like, 100 years ago and what our mobile newspaper sites look like today. They are, it certainly looks better. We've seen great advancements. The screen is less cluttered. Technologically, there are some interesting things maybe that are happening. But in terms of product, basically what we've done is repurposed or republished content from the newspaper initially to the web in the 90s and 2000s, and then from the web to our mobile devices. And for that reason, it's hard to grab people's attention because inherently our digital devices are nothing like the original devices that were, and that device was a newspaper that were around when journalism was starting. If you look at the top 25 mobile platforms, so what you're looking at are the top applications now in the United States. They're all platforms. So these are all organizations that have created a platform that's malleable, that does interesting things, but uses other people's content. This is what is the most popular. There are mobile applications that are capturing attention immediately, and they're doing a good job of it, and that's because their utility is immediately clear. So there's this app called Sit or Squat, which should be pretty self-explanatory. It's immediately clear what the purpose is, why I'm there, and what I can do. And although on that wrestling app, which is in the center, looks like there's a lot of stuff there, if you're somebody who follows, wrestling, then you are able to sort of, in that 3 seconds of time, get immediate cues and understand what you're looking at. And the same is true for many other applications. So this is a leadership challenge. And the question is, how do you make those 3 seconds count? So I think Justin Ellis is speaking. He's in the room. He's got one of my favorite Twitter avatars of all time. And if you were to put what you're doing in the context of Justin, and we know that we've got 3 seconds to capture his attention, and we also know that he's got a mobile phone, right, with him at all times. The question is, what can we learn about him? Well, there's a lot that we can know, right? We know if he's walking or if he's driving or if he's on a train. We know if he's coming to a news story. Just looking at the data from his phone, we would know if he's already learned about the topic, if he's already engaged with it before. We would know where he is. Is he at home? Is he is not camping with his kids, but is he at home? Is he at a work location? Is he somewhere else? What time of day is it? Is he eating? Is he doing something else? Can we look at his calendar and try to figure out some of these things? What we're trying to get at is to capture that attention, right? What does Justin want at this moment in time? Now, you could certainly ask him, but it would be smarter to ask his data, right? And here's what we know about Justin just by looking at his data. We know what his schedule is. We know what his locations are, his speed. We know what he reads. We know what he listens to. We know how often he might come to a particular website, your website. We know what he clicks on, what his interest areas are. We know whether or not he responds to retargeting. We know who his friends are. We know how tech savvy he is. We know a lot of stuff. And so if you're trying to figure out how to make those 3 seconds count, can you leverage what you know in order to deliver him stuff that he's going to interact with? Because the reality is that if you look into your mobile phone, you're going to see a truer reflection of yourself than if you were to look into any mirror. So how do you create action around this? I think that this is a device strategy, and you should start changing your paradigm. And I've been saying this for the past 2 years, and hopefully at some point some folks will start taking action on this. This is not about responsive design, and it's not about creating content for the individual device. It's about creating content for the individual consumer. So, think about Justin or think about yourself. Think about those 3 seconds. How can you figure out ways to capture that person's attention and to continue to engage them using their data and using what you know about what they're doing at this moment in time, and what is most likely to make them continue working with you. So this requires very, very sophisticated thinking. I have not seen anybody do this yet, but this is not about a mobile-first strategy or a digital-first strategy. This is about an audience-first strategy. And I realize audience may be, as a word, verboten today, so substitute audience for whatever word it is that you all decide you're going to use, but you get the point. All right, the second recommendation is to start learning from messaging applications. So this is a messaging application from Japan. It's called Line. It's making its way here into the United States. And Line, it's one part messaging, so it sort of replaces your text messaging service. It's one part platform integration, so just as Google now delivers you, integrates with other platforms and delivers you cards, In a similar way, you can follow different brands within the Line ecosystem and get notifications from them and coupons and that sort of thing. And one of the things that Line is known for is stickers. And what you see on the screen are two sets of stickers. And this may seem very strange to all of you, but it's worth sort of talking through a little bit why stickers are sticky. For one thing, there's a certain level of nostalgia. So I'm a young Gen X person. If you're in my age group, you grew up with sticker books. If you're a millennial, you probably had emoji, or you responded to emoji faster. And we have a certain level of institutional understanding. So if we put a gold star on something, that replaces many words that we may have had to type, and it conveys a certain sentiment. So stickers are pretty attractive, and that's one of the things that helped to catapult this messaging service and make it so popular. And the thing is that Line is garnering huge numbers of users, so 1.7 million new users every day. And they've seen a significant amount of growth, and their revenue is also pretty high. If you look at their revenue in relationship to other news organizations, this is a messaging service. Again, it's a platform where everybody else is putting their content onto. They're sort of right up there with some of the larger newspaper companies in the United States. So the question is, what is messaging and chat, and what does this have to, why should you care? Well, the reason that we message is to avoid fees. We have private conversations. We ask for information. We do all different kinds of things when we message. And there are niche messaging services. So this is called Luca. It's an app only works in San Francisco right now, but it allows you to have a chat with your phone or the application, and it will make recommendations about what to do and what to eat and that sort of thing. Venmo is a payment system, but a lot of people use it for chat, in addition to making payments. And the chat aspect is one of the reasons that this thing is so sticky, even though it's a payment platform. Chat is about utility, entertainment, and news. And they also offer in-app purchases. So if you start thinking through, what would people pay for, because that's part of what the conversation around engagement is in news organizations. Successful apps help us win. So if you think about Candy Crush or Dots or the Kardashian game, whatever it is that you do, anytime there's a fee associated, it's to help you level up. Or in the case of Line, right? You can buy these stickers for 99 cents, and it helps us one up our friends, make us more awesome, right? And they feed our addictive behaviors. There's a very, very low price point. For just $1, you can get to the next level. You can get to the next, thing. And that is not the case with news organizations. So, the monetization strategy hinges on two assumptions. One, that people came to your app or your website on purpose versus through a link that somebody shared on social media. And two, that people value the brand enough to want, 5 free stories or whatever it is a month in exchange for registering. We already know that the punishment strategy is incongruous with our current digital behavior. It's not what anybody else does. And what that tells us is that news organizations are not helping us win. Instead, they're preventing us from getting utility, entertainment, and news. So when we think through chat, right? Chat is a next generation platform. If you sort of think about it holistically. And it's also an opportunity for monetization if you think about it strategically, sort of in the right way. And it's and the other thing to think it through is that these chat services don't work without news. So there was just a big announcement about the replacement for The Daily Show. Everybody's talking about it, but nobody would be talking about it if the New York Times had not published a story. So that means that news organizations have real value to add, but they lack the platform. So maybe it's time for news organizations instead to create the platform. So how does chat inform your digital strategy? How do you leverage your audience and their desire to chat? This would be a good year to start thinking through a possible chat integration and messaging strategy. All right, the third and the last has to do with FOMO. So the third recommendation is embrace FOMO, or fear of missing out. 8 years ago in 2008, Quick, Justin TV, a few other services had launched, and these were the original streaming services. We now have Periscope and Meerkat, and so the question is, what's new? Well, it's what I was just talking about, the chat aspect plus the video. So sometimes the S-curve looks like what I originally showed you. Sometimes it looks like this. And so Justin TV and Quick emerged from the fringe when we still had PCs and laptops. As we got smartphones, these services were harder to use. And at the same time, we had Facebook and we were being introduced to social networks, which meant that that conversation that had been live broadcast now was in a shorter, more compact format and more instantaneous, right? So what we had was a first convergence, and then we started with a second convergence around people's desire to stream. Plus now we have smartphones, which means we're untethered from our desks. Plus we have social media. And in the middle of all of this, we wound up with a new protocol, technological protocol to make that streaming much easier, which is, why Skype and Google Hangouts and FaceTime works. And now we've got ubiquitous data. So what I'm trying to say is it's sort of no shock that we have Meerkat and Periscope, and it sort of followed along this trajectory. So if we're talking about attention, this is a good time to start tracking how attention is shifting, right? So the reason that these have suddenly taken off is partially because there's a feeling that if you don't watch whatever this thing is right now, it's going to be gone forever, even though technically it's archived, or it could be, and that you'll miss out. This was me screwing around last week. This is I've never listened to One Direction. That was the first day I'd ever heard it, but I was playing around and I made a little game, and you had to try to get the hearts to float up on Periscope to hit the guy from One Direction who quit. Anyhow. And yet people did it, right? Because it's this crazy thing and it's in the middle of the day. There's also a feeling that you're going to get to connect with somebody in a very deeply personal way because, again, it takes that chat experience, which is very intimate, combines it with social and video. And so here's John Hodgman talking with a friend of his, but it looks and feels like FaceTime, right? Or Google Hangout when you talk to somebody else. So there's this feeling of intimacy that's difficult to explain unless you've done it, and that becomes very addictive, and that captures attention. This was over the weekend. I was at the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, where I'm on the board, and I went backstage in the middle or in the intermission, and I was talking to the musicians, and I was showing people what the stage looked like. Again, there's a sort of feeling and level of intimacy that I couldn't do otherwise, right? I couldn't just tweet photos. There's also a feeling of getting special access, so you get to watch a story unfold. So on the day that Periscope launched was the day that building in the city in New York exploded, which was interesting timing. But we had just massive engagement, people paying attention, and bypassing the local broadcasts for what people were broadcasting on Periscope. This poses an additional burden to news organizations. We are now talking about a vastly different kind of video. There is no more, the intermediary, which is the news organization, becomes that much less important. We're talking about a vastly different kind of citizen journalism, one that's very, again, captures attention, very sticky. It also raises some privacy and ethics concerns, I think. It also, you have to start thinking through what constitutes a story, what qualifies as a story. And there are some opportunities, I think, for monetization and also probably some challenges moving forward. And again, just think, we see breaking news on CNN and a lot of news organizations' websites, but if you've got this sort of level of intimacy, this natural fear of missing out, and it's on my mobile device, and I no longer have to go to your website, suddenly the game has changed a little bit. We already know that we're ambiently paying attention to our lock screens all day long. So if you go back to what I said at the very beginning, we start to see what the S-curve, how it's unfolding and how this fits in. So what do you do to create action? These networks are going to start to change how people share content and ideas. My recommendation is not to go out and set up a channel, but instead to have some real solid strategic meetings to figure out what's next and what this means for you. How do you leverage it? Thanks.
Okay, real quickly, anyone have a question? Do you have a couple of seconds here more?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah, here, let me see if I can.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Spellbound. The room is spellbound.
It's a lot for
It was a lot, and it was great information. And I think the ephemeral nature of attention and engagement's really fascinating. Really? No question. Yeah, oh, see, it just took a little urging. It took a little prodding. All right, Chad.
Hey there. Talk a little bit about commerce in these chat scenarios with Facebook, obviously, and just the other ones going into with changing money.
Okay, so you have to look at you have to sort of look at a sort of broader vantage point. Periscope was bought by Twitter. Twitter launched Medium. The developers, people who founded Twitter launched Medium. And then there's Twitter, the social media network. They are building, all of these companies are building out platforms. Okay, the platforms are not necessarily that revolutionary or brand new, but the platforms are being built out. And because they own the platforms, even with Facebook's plan to bring news organizations' content, into their network and to publish it, they own the platforms. Whoever owns the platforms owns the money. From my point of view, there's no reason why we can't flip that paradigm. News organizations shouldn't just be a constant supply of content. I think they should start really dramatically rethinking the platform, and flipping it. I don't think that answered your question. This is my impassioned plea for stop making. So if you read Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, one of the key points is that it's much easier, and this makes sense, it's much easier for executives to incrementally tweak and fix the status quo because that's safe. It's much harder to go out to the fringe and to completely try something that is revolutionary and new. And what I'm saying is we should stop tweaking, making these incremental changes. It is time for news organizations to create their own future. And right now, you are not doing that. It is being done for you by somebody else.
Hi, Amy. My name is Megan Farnsworth. I'm with the Center for Investigative Reporting. And this actually kind of pairs really nicely to your question, which is you're talking about chats and apps that other people have built. Do you see value of the integration of those platforms onto news organizations versus news organizations actually developing something brand new? Because obviously there's huge risk and developer time and money that goes into that. So what's the value of doing your own thing and risking that failing versus using those platforms on our own?
So the value is, the value is that you're not going to screw it up. It's going to sound terrible, but here's what I mean by that. My fear is that if a news organization or company decided to make its own chat platform, it would be called like News Now, right? And the design would be weird. It would feel like it was part of a giant news organization, and it wouldn't feel like a native platform that was scaled down and sleek and not specifically meant to funnel content in from an organization. What I'm talking about requires substantively different thinking. The benefit is, if you want to everybody rushed to partner with Snapchat. Snapchat, is a chat platform that makes sense. They need news organizations because without stuff to talk about, they will just snap photos of themselves, which is, is fine. That'll always work, but they need more substance. What's in it for news orgs? I don't know. Short-term recognition of doing something different, and maybe a small amount of monetization potential. I'm telling you, I don't know how to say this any more clearly, and maybe I'm not being clear. News organizations, if your goal is to capture attention, right? I mean, you just look at the data. The news organizations can't continue to relegate out the future of the industry to other companies. You have to do it yourself. You have to start doing it yourself, which is not to say don't partner with other kinds of organizations, but there's a difference between being the majority partner with the majority say and the partner that really wants to get into the sandbox and play, and so we're going to dangle our content, and maybe you'll let us play with you if we come with our content.
Amy Webb, thank you so much for your time this morning. Very inspiring, very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you.